It's not because of intellectual objections or evidence or lack of evidence. In the end, it comes down to, do you want to believe it or not? And many of us just don't want to believe it. And so we rationalize it, you know.
Wait a second. Did he just say that it's not about a lack of evidence for God or Jesus or whatever in the hell he's talking about? It's not the fact that we're unconvinced by the position. It's just that we don't want to believe in it. I have to say, this whole idea that atheists simply just don't want to believe in either Jesus or God is one of the most frustrating things that I've encountered. And it really grinds my fucking gears. If y'all want to fuck around and find out how mad I get about this guy and why he thinks I don't believe in Jesus' resurrection, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be looking at a guy that's wanting us to believe in the Bible, or rather Jesus' resurrection, or just the Christian religion in general. He's got a lot of reasons as to why we should believe it, but more importantly, there are reasons why he believes the Bible and Jesus' resurrection are true. I'm always very interested to see why people believe the things that they do. And if I am wrong about something, I do want to know about it. So I feel compelled to at least check this video out. So alright, lone dude sitting on the rock by the ocean, what do you got for us?
The more I was exposed to the Bible, the more I believed it. With careful sequential teaching, like working through expository preaching, exegetical preaching, working through one chapter at a time, I could see the coherence of it and the way that it just made sense, and it just won me over every time.
You see, I just don't understand this at all. Like, I don't understand this concept, because the more that I exposed myself to the Bible, the more I couldn't believe it. Like, I just couldn't understand why people believe that shit. And I mean, I grew up Christian. It's not like I didn't grow up reading the Bible. It's that I grew up with people reading me selections from the Bible and teaching me different things about the theology of Christianity using very specific Bible verses instead of actually reading the Bible with a critical lens. Instead, they, forced these Christian glasses on me and made me read the Bible the way that they wanted me to understand the Bible. So the more that I exposed myself to the actual Bible, it drove me that much farther away from believing it. So it really blows my mind that anybody can read through the Bible and think that it's coherent. The fuck are you talking about? When you read the Bible from cover to cover, just straight how it's laid out in official Bibles, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not coherent whatsoever. On the Daily Bible podcast, KC and I read through the Bible in chronological order using the Daily Bible. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to think that if you just read the Bible from cover to cover, it's going to make any kind of sense.
For me, it became clear that it all came down to whether or not Jesus rose from the dead. As the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, if he did not rise from the dead, then Christianity is a cruel joke. It cannot be true. But if he did rise from the dead, then it is the truth, and it changes the world.
Yeah, but I feel like you're falling prey to the possible, therefore probable kind of fallacy. Like, is it possible that Jesus could have risen from the dead? Sure. But I think that nothing in Paul can prove to us that Jesus really did rise from the dead. I think Paul is a first-hand account of what happened some 20 years at least after Jesus supposedly died. And even then, Paul only ever talks about how he hallucinated a Jesus. Not that Jesus actually did resurrect from the dead. There's also a bit of a false dichotomy worked in here, because it's either Christianity is true or it was a lie. I don't think that those are the only two possibilities to answer the question of, whether or not Jesus resurrected from the dead. I feel like providing this kind of false dichotomy here that it's either a lie or it's true is looking to lead your audience in a certain direction, because I don't think that anybody would say, oh, well, Paul lied about it. Even if they did, I don't think they can make a solid case that Paul was lying. I think that Paul genuinely believed in his hallucination, but I think that he was mistaken about Jesus resurrecting from the dead. We don't have any eyewitness accounts of even Jesus' death, but also his resurrection. We just have people talking about their hallucinations some 20 years later.
So it came down to one question, and that's one of the neat things I've always appreciated about the Christian message, is that you can actually test it. There's a point where you can test it. It's falsifiable, unlike any other religion or philosophical system that can't be tested. This can be tested.
Yes, it can be tested, but also that's the reason why I'm not a Christian, is because I did test it. I tested this idea, and there's no historical information that could prove that Jesus resurrected from the dead. There's no eyewitness statements about it. All there are people talking about hallucinations they had after the fact. And just because a belief arises, like the belief that Jesus resurrected from the dead, just because that belief arose does not mean that the belief is based on fact. And I think that this is a pretty big problem that a lot of apologists have. Just because the belief arose at some point in history, that does not mean that it's actually happened. Just that the belief arose. Also, I'd really love to know what other religions he claims can't be tested. I mean, for the life of me, I can't really think of another religion that can't be tested in similar ways that Christianity is tested. If any religion out there makes fantastical claims, we can definitely test those fantastical claims. So I really have no idea what in the fuck he's talking about.
If the resurrection happened, it's true. If it didn't happen, it's not true. And in the end, if I looked at all the historical sources, I thought about the eyewitnesses, I considered all the arguments against the resurrection, and concluded it's harder to believe that he didn't rise from the dead than it is to believe that he did. And I honestly believe that.
Oh, I trust that you honestly believe this, but at the same time, I cannot believe that. I just simply can't believe that it's easier to believe in magic than it is to believe in the natural world. For one thing, magic, or what I'm calling magic being the resurrection or any of the miraculous claims of Christianity, for instance, I just simply can't believe that it's easier to believe that than the natural world that we have observed for hundreds of thousands of years to operate the way that it does. We've been able to scientifically test things, and it has shown that the natural world operates in a certain way. And that certain way does not really give a lot of room for magic or miracles, whatever. I guess I can understand how it's easier because you just believe in the miraculous things and you don't really think too deeply into it. You don't think about how it contradicts the natural order of the universe. And like, for instance, in the Old Testament, when Moses goes up on the mountain and he tells everybody, you can't come up here. It's all cloudy and smoky and stuff, but trust me, I'm talking to God and he's penning the 10 Commandments and writing all this shit down for me with his lightning dick. And you just got to trust me about it, okay? Don't come up there and look, or else God will flee like you're shining a light on a cockroach. He just gets the hell out of there, okay? I cannot just sit there and accept any longer stuff like that that's told to me. I just can't accept it without questioning. Like, what, Moses, hold on now. Why can't we go up there and see God? Oh, well, if you see God, then you're going to go blind. Oh, okay. Is there any other way that we can test to make sure that God's really up there? Like, I don't know, could you take a picture of it, or is that going to burn the camera out? Like, I don't know. Like, what? Is there any other way that you can actually verify to us that God is really up there doing it? Nope, you just got to take me at my word. I'm just not wired like that. Some people are wired to just believe things that they're told. I am not.
I didn't have to convince myself into that. I just intellectually cannot believe that he did not rise from the dead when you consider the evidence.
What evidence? There's no eyewitnesses accounts. He talked about considering the eyewitness accounts. There are no eyewitness accounts. Paul is not an eyewitness to Jesus' resurrection. Paul had a hallucination of Jesus. The Gospels are not eyewitness accounts either. They're anonymously written. Nothing in them connects to anything in history. Luke is the only one that even attempts to make it look like he's recording history. But even so, he doesn't list anybody that he got his information from. He just vaguely talks about having previously written sources. And that's it. That's not how you do history, especially in the first century. So there were no eyewitnesses. There were no eyewitness accounts. There is no intellectual evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. It's just purely based on faith from what I can discern. So I have no idea what he's talking about when he says that intellectually he can only believe in the resurrection of Jesus.
It's what the eyewitnesses claimed and what happened to them that's the key. So the original disciples are a big factor, but Paul is a big factor too, because Paul had nothing to gain by becoming a Christian or fabricating a story about the resurrection of Jesus. He had everything to lose, and he was passionately opposed to the message of Jesus. That's the thing.
Well, he was originally passionately opposed to Christians, not necessarily the message of Jesus, but Christians, and then he had his hallucination and he turned his life around. These people were not disciples or in any way had any kind of connection to a historical Jesus. Paul never indicates anybody as being a disciple. I don't know what this guy could be talking about when he's talking about disciples and their testimonies and everything, but even if you just take the Gospels at their word about the disciples, they were all peasant people. They did not learn how to read and write. So it's kind of amazing to me that he thinks these peasant people who had no means or motivation to learn to read and write eventually read and wrote things. That's what I don't get. But also trying to retroactively determine what Paul's motivation was, I feel like you're going to fail every single time because we can't know what Paul's motivation was. But to say that Paul had no motivation, I think is being a little bit myopic, because Paul turning his life around and, then leading the Christian group in that area, I think there's plenty of motivation behind that. Free food, you get exalted by others, you get treated like you're special, all because, you have these hallucinations of their savior. I mean, I think that there's plenty of motivation there for Paul to sort of turn around and, become one of the leading Christian apostles. So to say that he had everything to lose and nothing to gain is just rejecting all of the information we have about what he did have to gain from it. And I feel like that's not what he's considering. Especially if you take a look at like Lee Strobel and J. Warner Wallace. Both of them were hard opposed to Christianity to begin with, and then they turned their lives around, and now they're some of the leading apologists in the community. This seems to be a trend in Christianity of people being so opposed, and then, now they're the leaders of the community because they once doubted it or something like that. It seems like there's enough motivation there to explain this away if you wanted to see it that way. But I sincerely believe that Paul thought that he saw a risen Jesus. I think that he fully believed in that because that's what the evidence shows us. And I typically try not to argue from things that we don't have evidence for.
And so for me, Paul's testimony that the risen Jesus really did appear to him on the road to Damascus, and then you see the incredible transformation in his life. A transformation that could only occur if he genuinely and honestly believed that that event happened, leading to intense suffering and persecution all the rest of his life, and finally martyrdom, being beheaded in Rome. I cannot believe that Paul made up that story. It makes no sense that he would make up that story and devote his life to something that he knew was false.
Well, see, I don't think that Paul thought it was false. I think that Paul genuinely believed in his hallucination. In this section, this guy talks about how the only thing that could ever explain that is that Jesus really did resurrect. But it could also be explained by Paul just being mistaken. Paul could just simply be mistaken about Jesus really resurrecting. He just had a hallucination. I had an extensive talk with KC this morning about how him walking to Damascus on that road and being dehydrated could have led to a hallucination. And he completely believed in this hallucination and it changed his life. This is not something that just doesn't ever happen. People have these kinds of experiences all the time that just radically change their life. And that doesn't mean that their hallucinations were real. It just means that they were incredibly convinced by what they experienced. But that does not make it inherently true.
See, now, people die, even today, people die for what they believe in. That's not the amazing thing. The amazing thing is, if it's a lie, he died for something he knew was a lie. And that's true for all the eyewitnesses who died for their faith. They died for something they knew was false. And I can't accept that. I can't accept it. It makes no sense at all. It's easier to believe that there is a God who can raise the dead than to believe that these people fabricated a lie and then willingly suffered and died for it without any one of them recanting and saying, before someone pulls the trigger, wait, don't kill me, we made it up.
So let's think about this a little critically. Paul talks about how there were Christians before him. Paul was persecuting Christians. Paul wouldn't have been the person to make this up if it were a lie. If we were to assume that a group of Jews decided to lie about the Messiah and tell everybody that the Messiah had come, died, resurrected, and absolved sins. Let's say that they knew it was a lie. They weren't the ones that were dying for the faith, at least that we know about. Paul completely believed in the faith. He didn't lie. He didn't make it up, because this whole idea of a dying and rising Messiah was already in Jewish theology. It just took some people that were inclined, for whatever reason, to say that he had already come and done these things to start the belief. Paul and the other apostles and the other Christians that were eventually persecuted for being Christian, they weren't the ones that would have been lying. So these are two totally different groups that we're talking about here. Those that started the cult, which would have come before Paul, and we know nothing about whether they were lying or they sincerely believed it. We just don't know. But the point of fact is that it started with these people, and they were not the ones that were being persecuted. They were not the ones with something to lose. They were the ones with everything to gain from it. Being that, this whole idea of an eternal life. I would think that that would be a really big motivator to make something up like this. So we're talking about two different groups here, and convoluting these two groups is kind of an equivocation fallacy, because the two groups are vastly different.
They all willingly and joyfully went to their death for this. So I think the only other option, and this is the one that really the most intelligent skeptics go for, is that no, they really did believe it, but they were deceived. It was hallucination or something like that.
Oh, well, shit. He knows our counter apologetics there, honey. Fuck us. Damn it, we're gonna have to pack all this shit up. They figured us out, y'all.
And again, you consider the stories and the evidence, it just doesn't stack up. It's, again, it's easier for me to believe that there is a God who raises the dead than to believe in this group hallucination for 500 people that occurred over 40 days. They all saw the exact same thing at different times, and so on and so on. It just doesn't hold water for me.
Wait, but that's not what Paul relates to us. Paul doesn't say that the 500 people saw all the exact same thing or even received the exact same message from Jesus. It's just that Jesus appeared to 500. That's it. And I've made this point several times before. 500 people in the mass of like 600,000 people that were living in Judea at the time is really nothing. Like, you would not be able to find the 500 people given the information that we're given. It's not like people had a registry of who was in this 500, this crowd of 500, so that they could go and talk to them. It was just an early creed that was passed around saying 500 people saw Jesus resurrect from the dead. Or not resurrect from the dead, but being that he was risen, Jesus appeared to them. That's it. That is not the kind of information we would need in order to verify what these people saw. Not even in the first century. Not even in Paul's time. Not even for somebody that just missed it by like a week. If you just say, oh, well, 500 people saw this guy resurrect from the dead right in front of them. Oh, where are they? I don't know. Like, we don't know. So to say that these people saw all the exact thing is not true. They saw the risen Jesus, and this can be explained by a group hallucination. But even so, I think that particular part's interpolated in Paul, because it's just one small spelling error away from being that Jesus appeared over the Pentecost rather than to 500 people. I feel like it could be interpolated, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say that it did appear to 500 people in that particular passage. This is still just a very ambiguous reference. But also, I want to touch on the fact that he can't get away from it being easier to believe in miraculous things than to believe in nature. And that still blows my mind, because every miraculous thing that we have experienced in our past has eventually been explained by natural processes. So it seems like thinking that something is natural, like a hallucination or something of that kind, that seems to be a much more likely situation than a miracle happening, considering that no miracle has actually panned out to be a miracle. It's always been explained by natural things. So it really does blow my mind to hear somebody say that it's easier to believe in magic or miracles than it is to believe in the natural world. Something that we interact with on a daily basis. Something that we see work consistently throughout time.
It's not because of intellectual objections or evidence or lack of evidence. In the end, it comes down to, do you want to believe it or not? And many of us just don't want to believe it. And so we rationalize it.
No, I don't know. Because I can see this from two different directions here. For one, he's talking explicitly about atheists. and how, we don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus. And he's saying that it's because we don't want to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. And it's not because there's no intellectual evidence for it, or there's no evidence at all that Jesus resurrected from the dead. It's not because of any of those reasons. It's just a matter of whether we want to or not, which is a real misrepresentation of our position. Just because I am unconvinced of the resurrection of Jesus doesn't mean that I want it to be true or don't want it to be true. The other way that I can see him talking about this is that it really doesn't matter if there is intellectual evidence for it or not. It doesn't matter if there's real historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, that it only comes down to whether you want it to be true or not. Because he says that many of us choose to not want it to be true. And when he says that many of us, it seems like he's talking about humans in general. And so he would be included in that too. So it's kind of like he's low-key talking about how it doesn't matter what evidence you have or don't have for the resurrection. It all comes down to whether you want it to be true. And it's not that I want it to be true or want it to be false. I just want to know the truth of reality. That's it. And for me, it doesn't seem like the resurrection of Jesus is what actually happened in reality. That just doesn't seem real to me based on the evidence. So contextualizing me being unconvinced of the resurrection of Jesus as just me not wanting it to be true is a straw man argument. And it's a little insulting, to be honest.
Augustine said, what the heart desires, the will accepts, and the mind justifies. So at the end of the day, the answer is our heart. Are we willing to believe it or not? And I think if people open up their heart to the possibility that this actually happened, then all the intellectual reasons and evidence and justification for it, it's all there. It's all there. It's entirely credible. You just have to be open to the possibility that it's true.
At this very end point right here, I feel like what he's telling us is that you have to first want it to be true in order for you to understand why it's true, or for you to believe that it's true. And I feel like that's kind of putting the cart before the horse, because I feel, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel like what he's telling us is that you have to at least believe somewhat in the resurrection of Jesus in order to accept that Jesus resurrected. And at that point, once you accept that he resurrected, then you can find intellectual evidence, or you can find historical evidence to support your conclusion. And I feel like that's not how you should go about determining what you believe and why you should believe it. Because you could literally want anything to be true and then figure out reasons as to why it is true. I feel like you should think about a question and then investigate whether or not it's true. Like, did Jesus resurrect from the dead? Well, here's our evidence. It does not seem like that is possible, and it doesn't seem like it probably happened. So you probably shouldn't believe in it. That's the way that I kind of worked through it. But this guy seems to want you to at least come more than halfway to believing that Jesus did resurrect from the dead, and then just, I guess, will yourself to believe the rest of the way. And I feel like that's not a very good way to go about this. But, I don't believe in Jesus' resurrection, so maybe I just don't want it to be true or something. I don't. But in any case, I'd really love to hear what you heathens think about this guy's video. Do you think that it really just comes down to whether or not you want it to be true? Or do you think that there's a little bit more to it for atheists? I know for myself personally, there's definitely a whole lot more to it. I'm unconvinced by the arguments for Jesus' resurrection, and therefore I am not a Christian, nor am I a theist in any kind of way, because the same kind of logic that I use for the resurrection could also be used for God's existence, and I still am not convinced that a God exists. So it's not a matter of whether or not I want it to be true. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.